Hello folks, with the Midnight Developer Deep Dive and Q&A this week, followed by the opening up of the alpha, we've obtained a bunch of fresh details about what's coming up. Throughout the testing period, I'll be including story spoiler-free roundups of all the key discoveries in these regular news videos, along with a series of deeper dive videos once things start to stabilise. As expected, a fair bit of the deep dive was a recap on the details that had been previously announced at Gamescom, but the developer team was still able to come up with a few surprises, along with, at long last, the first early signs of player housing exteriors, and that's where I'm going to start. Currently on the alpha, obtaining a house is a pretty quick and straightforward process, involving a single quest and 1,000 gold. The dev team have warned that this amount is a placeholder, so don't be surprised if it ends up increasing a bit. That said, we have been promised that housing is going to be super affordable, so it probably won't end up being a massive increase. One very pleasant surprise was how visually attractive the Horde housing area is. The Alliance Zone is gorgeous, as you would expect, but I think that many of us had been worried that the Horde area would lean too hard into the Durotar red sand desert look. Now, to be sure, the desert home look is an option, but both housing areas are divided into multiple sub-areas with very different aesthetics, with the Horde having lovely conifer forests, which remind me a lot of Grizzly Hills, cute beachfronts, and an area that will make trolls feel a lot at home. For the Alliance housing area, things are a lot more like what you would expect, albeit there's the promised spooky area, with an option to have a graveyard for a neighbour, along with some rather lovely coastal cliffside plots. Both zones do offer a lot of different options for the type of housing plot you can get, from secluded corners through to little clusters of 4 or 5 homes for the more socially inclined. The areas are also full of character, with plenty of prop houses, presumably for the many NPCs that bring the housing areas to life, and this does open up a middle ground option where you can have a neighbour who isn't another player. Now, Blizzard have already announced that the early access would not include the new Endeavour system that in Midnight will allow us to further progress our houses, one implication of which is that the initial early access to housing would mean that we'll have to live with whatever restrictions are placed on our housing for the first couple of months. The good news though is that those restrictions are pretty generous. The initial limit on the number of items you can place is 300 inside and 200 outside. Now, to put that in context, that is the same limit as a fully unlocked medium-sized house in Final Fantasy XIV, with its largest houses maxing out at just 400 items. Most players in Final Fantasy XIV never notice those limits, so basically you'll need to put in a pretty determined effort in order to hit the housing limits in World of Warcraft. Room-wise, initially we'll be able to create 9 rooms over multiple floors, and I do emphasise the word create. We are able to choose our own floor plans, with a variety of room shapes to choose from, including towers and staircases. Once we do get into Midnight, progressing housing will raise the limit up to 24 rooms and 825 items inside. Now, getting there will only involve 5 progress steps, which does make me wonder if this could eventually end up going even higher later on in the expansion. Now, the big question, of course, is how to get those all-important decorations. Well, there's going to be a lot that's going to be very easy to obtain from vendors, especially renowned vendors. And if you're a World of Warcraft veteran, you can expect to get a ton more from old achievements, many of which are getting housing rewards attached to them, as will many older quests. Professions, as promised, are getting in on it as well, with a focus on inscription, enchanting and jewel crafting. Profession items will involve a brand new class of reagent called Lumber, combined with other existing old expansion reagents. On the alpha, lumber basically worked by finding trees with a kind of shadow axe embedded in them and clicking on it to collect. I'm not sure if that's a placeholder for a possible new secondary profession or not, but it does look like gatherers may be looking forwards to making some decent gold in patch 11.2.7 and beyond. For those of you who have pre-purchased Midnight, player housing is now officially confirmed to be arriving on December the 2nd in North America and the 3rd in the EU. Blizzard did not specifically confirm that this will also be the release date for patch 11.2.7, but I think it's a pretty safe bet that that will be the case. Now, a more unexpected surprise from this week's deep dive was a brand new game feature called Arcantina. Some of you older hands may remember that back in Battle for Azeroth's patch 11.2.0, data miners discovered evidence of a very large tavern interior, which was dubbed as the Hearthstone Tavern, but which never saw the light of day until recently when the Seasons comic saw the Sons of Lothar from Warcraft 2 hold a reunion event in a venue that sounded very similar. In Midnight, this tavern is arriving as a brand new player hub venue, which will see NPC visitors showing up, offering quests and stories that will send us all across Azeroth. Mechanically, this does sound a bit similar to the Warlords of Draenor's Garrison's Inn, albeit one that is likely to be a lot more social. And indeed, if this is done well, I do think that it could have a lot of potential to become a driver of organic socialization in-game, similar to the old Brawler's Guild. At the same time though, I do wonder how having effectively 2 player hubs, along with of course player housing areas as a potential third, will play out in practice. And I do worry that it could end up splitting the player base and making Silvermoon feel a little empty. On the subject of Silvermoon, its revamp is truly spectacular, and I'm pretty confident that it will be an enormous success with everyone. The Horde only area, which is about a third of the space, is essentially the current Silvermoon capital city, albeit this has also had a full visual update, with the neutral area covering the western ruins and an area to the north of the current map. The update of Eversong Woods is also outstanding, retaining the magical vibe from the Burning Crusade original, and is now expanded to cover the Isle of Kildanas and the old Ghostlands area, along with a southern extension which merges seamlessly into the Plaguelands. And yes, you will be able to fly, and in fact the new zone fully embraces flying, with areas especially on Silvermoon which are only accessible by air. And for those of you who don't want to lose the original Burning Crusade areas, don't worry. A discreet portal down near the eastern Plaguelands will allow you access to those older areas should you want to revisit them. Thanks to the deep dive, we also got a few more details of the upcoming prey system. This is going to allow us to choose multiple difficulties for the open world, and as well as seeing us have to track down our targets, it will lead to us experiencing what are described as torments, which based on the description kind of remind me as a bit of a cross between Mythic Plus affixes and that old Eye of the Jailer mechanic. Now, I do hope that doesn't turn out to be the case, as I don't think that Eye of the Jailer mechanic from Shadowlands landed super well at the time. The prey system unfortunately won't be available to test for a few more weeks, so it does remain to be seen how it will pan out in practice, but I have to admit that the descriptions does leave me with some pretty major concerns. Blizzard have also announced the first round of alpha patch notes, which have revealed a pretty major class and specialization overhaul, which is set to impact pretty much everyone. In a separate blog, which I will link below, the developers have revealed that they want to reduce class complexity and make classes and specializations a lot more approachable, both for new and returning players, but also for veteran players wanting to try out other classes. Part of these changes, I think, are intended to dovetail into the developers' desire to reduce our reliance on add-ons, along with addressing issues that a few specializations have had recently with button bloat or the overly complex interactions between many talents. Now, I'm no class theory crafter, so I'm not going to be diving into all of the individual changes. How well the simplification will work for DPS players will, I think, vary depending on your personal approach to the game. The good news is that this is a first early swing at things, and the development team are committing to react to feedback. So if you do get alpha or beta access, I would encourage you to give your favourite specializations a go and do provide your feedback. Now, back in Gamescom, there were a couple of things that emerged that weren't very clearly confirmed by the developers, but which we do now have a bit more clarity on. The hinted at Valorstone Removal is indeed a thing. The good news is that the broader upgrade system is remaining and will, from midnight, just require crests, albeit the crests are now going to be better aligned with the gear upgrade tier. For example, you'll be able to use rune crests to fully upgrade your heroic tier items all the way. There are obviously a lot of open questions about how the individual upgrade tiers will change. Generally, gear rewards is one of the last things to be added during the alpha and beta process, so I suspect it will be some time before we find out more. And for crafted gear, instead of combining 2 half sparks, we'll instead be getting a full spark every week, but we will need 2 sparks in order to craft our items. The other change that we got confirmed this week is to Skyriding, with the Vigor system being removed and replaced with a fixed charge cooldown system. By default, we will have 6 charges on a 10-second cooldown, but flying downwards will halve that cooldown, which means that the current approach of maintaining momentum will still remain a thing. I'm not entirely sure what the point of this change is, as in practice it probably won't change how you use Skyriding. The update that I think is getting the most attention though is add-ons. Until now, Blizzard have been given some very mixed signals about how soon the proposed new restrictions in combat add-ons would arrive, but that has now been cleared up, and it's going to be very soon, with many of the major changes arriving in the 12.0 pre-patch. There are 3 major changes announced to add-on developers. The first is the removal of access to the real-time combat log. Now, this is not the combat log that is written to disk and used by Warcraft logs and Raider.io. Instead, it is the version that you see in the combat log tab in the chat pane, and which is used by the likes of DBM in details. The second change was the removal of the ability for add-ons to use the chat system to communicate with other players' add-ons within instances. This again is a feature that is widely used by things like details and many assigner weak orders. And the third change is a much more technical one, which Blizzard is referring to as secrets. This will basically prevent add-ons from reading the values of a lot of in-game data, mostly stuff that is combat related, while still allowing the add-ons to use it to customize visuals. That last change is a fairly technical back-end change, but it is one that is likely to impact the overwhelming majority of World of Warcraft add-ons, combat focused or not, albeit it is not necessarily going to kill them. I have seen some media sources confidently predicting that this is the end of the likes of weak orders and DBM, and a couple of hours ago I was planning to explain in this video that those predictions were probably overblown. However, that was before the developers of weak orders announced that they will not be supporting Midnight, and they are not alone, with the developer of popular rotational add-on Hikili also planning to end support when Midnight launches, and the class heads up display author Luxos announcing plans to switch to developing customizations for the new cooldown manager. And I am fairly confident that given the amount of changes that some add-ons will require to support Midnight, that other add-on creators will also be making similar announcements. But of course, many add-ons will still continue to be supported, such as DBM, whose author has confirmed that they do plan to continue. And there is already some more hope, as Blizzard have already responded to feedback about how the restrictions would prevent things like break timers in Raid, Loot Council add-ons and Mythic Plus key sharing, promising to relax some of the add-on communication restrictions when not in combat. This is very good news, as it does suggest that Blizzard are willing to not only listen to, but act upon feedback from add-on developers wherever the restrictions end up casting too wide a net, and this does give me some hope. Currently, it is very hard to predict where add-ons will eventually land, but I'm fairly confident that Midnight will not launch with the current restrictions. And I do plan to do a deeper dive into the state of add-ons in a few weeks, when hopefully we'll have a much clearer picture. One thing that I can say with some certainty is that if you use any unmaintained add-ons, that is ones that have perhaps not had any updates for a couple of expansions, it's highly likely that they will be broken when Midnight launches, unless of course the author returns or someone else picks them up to bring them up to date. We're all familiar with having a few broken add-ons at the launch of a new expansion pre-patch, at least for a few days until the authors can fix them up, and I would expect something similar to the start of Dragonflight when the UI changes broke an awful lot of add-ons, but with the fixes taking a lot longer to arrive this time around. At the end of the day, add-ons are not going away, but they are going to be changing, some more than others, and that will likely mean that your user interface in Midnight will end up looking quite a bit different to how it does today. How much it will change will depend on how many add-ons you currently use, but I suspect that we all have some adopting to do to the changes. But at the same time, the built-in user interface is getting some major improvements, and that will make it a much better place to fill in any gap. Now, while I do think that this will probably end up in the long terms being okay, I do nevertheless think that Blizzard's approach is very misguided, making such extensive changes to add-ons at the same time as they are introducing their own equivalents, rather than releasing those improvements first, taking feedback, and then restricting add-ons after seeing how we players adopt to the new tools is adding a lot of avoidable risk to this initiative, and bringing it in at the same time as we're getting fairly major class and spec changes is, in my view, playing with fire. A lot will rest on the developers' continued willingness to not just listen to, but to act quickly and very quickly on feedback. And that's it for the major fresh announcements for Midnight from this week, but it appears that there are a few hints about some possible new additions to patch 11.2.7 that have also snuck into the alpha. Please keep in mind that this is a bit speculative and subject to change. As many of us expected, an expansion-wide meta achievement for the War Within has shown up. Called World Soul Searching, it will award a brand new mount, the Gear Grinder Mark I, which is based on the Vexy and the Gear Grinders mount from the Undermine raid. This will require doing all 3 War Within raids on any difficulty, along with the War Within Pathfinder, Glory of the Delver, and the main patch meta achievements, All That Kaz, You Shall Not Pass, Owner of a Radiant Heart, and Unraveled and Persevering. A somewhat more surprising potential addition is the appearance of Shadowlands Timewalking in the calendar, along with the return of Turbulent Timeways, which is set to run from December the 2nd through to February the 10th. Assuming that this does happen, this will bring us fully up to date with Timewalking after Dragonflight completely skipped adding any new Timewalking expansions. And finally, fellow content creator Mr. GM spotted the reappearance of another old favourite, the Brawlers Guild, which appears will also be making a return in patch 11.2.7 along with 2 brand new mount rewards. And finally, for something that's a little bit closer, next week sees the launch of patch 11.2.5 and Legion's Remix. And thanks to the patch notes, there's a little bit of good news, which is a very substantial increase to the rate that the cosmetic currency of bronze will drop. The very high cost of cosmetics in Legion Remix has been my last residual concern about this event, and it's great to see the team buffing rates pre-launch rather than having to issue a panic buff a couple of weeks in when people start to complain. And that's it for this week's update. As always, I am interested to hear all of your thoughts. Are you excited by player housing, worried about add-ons, or just glad to see the back of them? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this update helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then do let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos along with my other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. And if you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me on social media for update. My link's in the description below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.